Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast welcomes Bob Livingston, a former member of Congress from Louisiana, the founding partner of the Livingston Group LLC, and author of the new book, The Rainbow Chaser, The Man Who Gambled for Success and Broke Even. Bob Livingston, thank you for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed.
Rob, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
I want to start with the title of the book, The Rainbow Chaser. I know there's a Judy Garland song that talks about chasing rainbows, but tell us the meaning.
Well, when I was a little kid, I started with a very little money. Yeah, my father left when I was about 6 years old. My mom went to work to raise my sister and me, and we started from scratch. She did a great job. Gave us a good education. I enlisted in the Navy when I was about 18 years old, but managed to finish college, law school. We became a lawyer and a prosecutor. I prosecuted in 3 separate agencies for 6 years. Then I got elected to Congress from New Orleans, Louisiana, and served in the Congress for 22 years. Then started a business after that, and a very successful business in the lobbying business in Washington, D.C. for the last 28 years. So I've been chasing rainbows, but I've been catching them too.
Well, that's a good thing. Bob, let's talk about your childhood. It was rough, and you describe in the book when your dad left the household. How did you all adjust, and how did you move forward successfully when that happened?
Well, really didn't have any choice. My mother had to find a job right away, and she did, and gradually, ultimately got a job as a personnel person in the shipyard, Avondale Shipyards in New Orleans. She was there for 15 years until she ultimately got remarried at the same time that I got married at age 22. Again, she gave me a good education, and I think that was key to everything that happened thereafter.
Let's talk about your time in the Navy and how you found your way there, because there were a lot of things going on in your adolescence. You certainly had opportunities. How did it happen that you joined the Navy?
After my freshman year of college, I decided that I was having too much fun at Tulane University. So I decided, well, I need a break, and I tried to sign up for a merchant marine ship, and I had a job. So I got my seaman's papers. The longshoremen went on strike, and the ship didn't go out, and I got frustrated. And a friend of mine was joining the Navy, so I joined the Navy. I was there 61 to 63, and on an aircraft carrier circling around the Caribbean. Had a wonderful time with the guys that I was serving with in the navigation department, and I became a navigator, even though I was partially colorblind, but that's another story altogether. But we circled Cuba for about 60 days. And I always said that it was so rough, we didn't get supplies, and people talk about their experiences in the war zone. Well, mine was so tough, I got weevils in my Rice Krispies, and otherwise I didn't have a hard time at all.
This was a challenging time for the United States. A lot of things going on, elections and assassinations. Let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You mentioned you were circling Cuba. What was going on?
Well, Fidel Castro decided to import missiles from Russia, and President John Kennedy thought that wasn't a great idea. He had already been through the Bay of Pigs, in which some valiant Americans and Cubans tried to take over Castro after he declared he was a communist once he took over the island. The Bay of Pigs was a disaster on Kennedy's watch, and so he wasn't going to let the missiles stay into Cuba when the Russians were coming in. And it was a confrontation that could very well have ended the world. I mean, we were both sides, us and Russia, were armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. But for some careful negotiations on both sides between Khrushchev and Kennedy, the whole world might have blown up. So it was a dangerous time. But Castro always said later on that if it had been up to him, he would have fired the missiles from Cuba. He would have blown up the ships. And I always took that personally because I was on one of those ships circling the island.
Yeah, a really challenging time. And also this was a ramping up in Vietnam. What was your perspective of what was happening there as our involvement increased over those years?
By the time I got out of the Navy in '63, I wouldn't have been able to find Vietnam on the map. I went back to college and began to finish my studies and then ultimately go to law school, get married and go to law school. My friends started going. I didn't have any friends that were drafted, but I had a couple of friends who became officers after they graduated, and they went to Vietnam. Then I had lots of friends later on that came back. I was fortunate that I had already gotten my service over with, so I didn't go to Vietnam, but I have great admiration for all those guys that went over. It was a tough war. It was a 20-year war that, frankly, was mishandled. Lyndon Johnson didn't do a good job, and we lost thousands of lives, roughly 56,000 lives, unnecessarily. And it should have gone better. It didn't, and we kind of came home with our tail between our legs. This kind of happens again in Afghanistan and too many other places.
Bob, I did want to talk about kind of bringing it to the present with the two places we just mentioned. One is Cuba, which seems to be coming to a head once again, and also Vietnam, which we've really established a new relationship with. They have manufacturing that is beneficial to the United States. So how do you view those two relationships, Cuba and Vietnam, the United States today?
Well, it's ironic that everything what goes around comes around. There I was in Cuba in 1962 when we were circling the island, and the world was about to go to war. And now we're we're at war with the Iranians. Cuba, in the process, is looking like it might collapse and open up. President Trump's done a remarkable job by extracting Maduro out of Venezuela and improving situations there. And they and the Iranians are chief benefactors for Cuba, along with the Russians. And I think that there's a strong possibility within the next few months that we could be talking about a Cuba Libre, something we've been talking about since 1957.
How would that change the dynamic of the world if the United States and Cuba actually had a good relationship?
Well, compared to Iran, they're a small component, but they're very important to our hemisphere. They've been undermining our countries throughout Latin America since Castro took over. I think Trump is absolutely right in recreating the Monroe Doctrine, or as he calls it, the Donroe Doctrine, by trying to privatize, present freedom for all of the people in Latin America. And we can't do it as long as the Cubans continue to train and arm Latin American governments to bring communism, effectively authoritarianism, to all of their various countries. We're making big improvements. Argentina is improved. Peru is improved. I think Venezuela is taking a big step forward because of what Trump did in getting Maduro out. Mexico is still a long shot because they've kind of been going the wrong way. But I think things are looking much brighter today than they did only 2 or 3 years ago.
Before we leave the 60s, I wanted to ask you about your view of that tumultuous decade. Lots of changes happening in America, lots of civil unrest. How did it look from your perspective?
Well, of course, we lost President Kennedy, tragically, when he was assassinated in Dallas in 1963. And then Martin Luther King in 68, and President Kennedy's brother, Bobby Kennedy, Sr., was killed in 1968. Everything, we were in a state of total change from the 50s, when things were very, very peaceful. Politics changed. There was an anti-war movement, and organizations like the SDS and college started fomenting dissatisfaction among our people. And the very people that rose up in the colleges of those days are the ones that control our universities today. So it's had monumental effect on the 60s have had great effect on the world in which we live today. But again, I feel optimistic today because we're beginning to turn it around. In this country, we've still got a lot to do to overcome the influence that the leftists have made, not only in the universities and most of our schools and so forth, but also in our politics, particularly in the Democrat Party.
Bob, I'd like to talk about your legal career, at least jumping in. How did you decide to go to law school, and what did you hope to accomplish as a lawyer?
Was really more interested in having a good time in my freshman year.
Yeah.
That's why I ended up in the Navy. But that focused my attention and made me realize I wasn't cutting out for Navy life for a career. I got out. I wanted to go back to school. I went back to school. I made decent grades. Before, in my third year of undergraduate college, my friends were already ahead of me, and I looked at a law test that one of them had taken in law school, and I said I could do that, and I just applied and got into law school. There was no great plan, but halfway, I was president of my class for a couple of those years, the junior and senior classes. Lyndon Johnson convinced me that I was not a Democrat, that I was a Republican, even though most people in the state of Louisiana were Democrats. I just thought he was doing a bad job running the war, and so I switched to the Republican Party, started getting interested in Republican politics. At the end of law school, I didn't have any great plan. I was going to sell insurance or sell title insurance for a friend of mine and a company that I knew of, and then just applied for a legal firm, and turned out to be the best thing I ever did. I saw a notice on the bulletin board, went to work for a guy named Dave Treen, who became the first Republican congressman and the first Republican governor of Louisiana. Under his tutelage, I got interested in politics, and the rest is history.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues with our guest, Bob Livingston, right after this.
Online at schillingshow.com.
ShillingShowMedia.com is your one-stop shop for websites, audio and video production, and photography.
ShillingShowMedia.com will take your project from conception to completion.
ShillingShowMedia.com is reasonably priced and highly professional.
Need a website for your business? Visit ShillingShowMedia.com.
Need a video created or edited? Visit ShillingShowMedia.com.
Have a photography or graphic design project? Visit ShillingShowMedia.com.
ShillingShowMedia.com is your one-stop shop for websites, audio and video production, and photography.
Visit ShillingShowMedia.com. That's ShillingShowMedia.com.
Schilling Show Unleashed.
We continue now on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Bob Livingston, former member of Congress from Louisiana and founding partner of the Livingston Group LLC. The new book is The Rainbow Chaser, The Man Who Gambled for Success and Broke Even. You mentioned Democrats and how they were perceived kind of at the time, and it was a different party. When you look back on those years, how has the Democrat Party changed since those days versus the Republican Party then and now comparison?
Well, I started actually getting involved in the early 70s with Dave Treen in Republican politics. Most of the state of Louisiana was Democrat. As I said, the Democrats were great people, and it was ultimately ran accidentally, but I ran for Congress, and I had to appeal as a Republican to Democrats. My seat had been held by the Democrat Party since Reconstruction. I lost the first time, and then I won the second time. But I had people come up to me all the time and say, I didn't leave the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party left me.
Yeah.
And that increased with intensity. The more I got involved, I started recruiting more and more people to become Republicans because the Democrat Party was beginning to drift leftward. And I say only beginning. By the time I was in Congress, and for the next 22 years, I served with Democrats, and many of them were some of my best friends. The Democrat Party hadn't lost its mind. I cannot say that today. I think the Democrat Party is controlled by the hard left, I'm virtually afraid for all of the Democrat Party. We need a good, viable, competitive two-party system. And right now, we've got a Democrat Party that is motivated by socialism and communism. We've got communists in New York and in California. And, the country's headed in the wrong direction if they listen to these extremists on the left on the Democrat Party. I'm hopeful that they'll reject that. And an interesting tally is what's going to happen in Virginia in the elections about how the redistricting. I'm curious to see how that works out.
Yeah, we're watching it very carefully here from Charlottesville to see what happens today. It doesn't look good. You mentioned in the book, and this is interesting because the post-Watergate era of American politics, things changed pretty drastically. So how was it being a Republican and the scandal that surrounded the Nixon presidency?
That was before I was in Congress, and Dave Train had to lead me through it. He was elected in 1971, first Republican congressman at the time. Right in the middle of Watergate.
Yeah,
it was tough for him. He was one of only 2 or 3 Republicans elected that year. For him, it was a very difficult time, but he hung in there and was a stalwart. And I think that the Watergate, by today's standards, was probably very, very small, almost de minimis, because we've had scandals since then that vastly exceed what happened at Watergate. He, frankly, probably found out about this break-in of the Watergate Hotel and should have come out right away and condemned it. And he didn't do it. And for that, he ended up almost getting impeached and having to resign from Congress. Today, what the Democrat Party did presumably under the leadership of President Obama and Hillary Clinton and the CIA and the FBI and the DIA and so forth, there was a conspiracy to get rid of President Trump. First, to keep him from winning the election against Hillary Clinton, and then to destroy him and his family with numerous state and federal lawsuits and criminal charges and civil suits and so forth. They just literally wanted to destroy the man. And he had the strength and the fortitude and the money. It cost him probably well over $100 million in legal fees. But he survived, and he shows that you can, if you stand up to him, you can beat him. And you should be of inspiration for anybody where lawfare is employed, where for whatever reason, a government authority goes after a person for political or personal reasons. That's what my book's about, and I'm hopeful that I wake people up that we cannot, in a free society, withstand the use of lawfare, the selective prosecution, I want to say persecution, of individuals by government agents. And unfortunately, we've got too much going on today. And I illustrate a number of cases where that happened in the book.
Yeah, this is such an important topic. And really, the government had been weaponized under the Biden administration to go after conservatives. So this topic of lawfare is something I know that you want people to pay attention to. How do we get their attention? Many people are not following on a granular level like you do or I do, and they're just seeing what they see on the mainstream media. So what's the first step in getting people to recognize what's going on?
I think when people see that acquaintances or friends are all of a sudden investigated and possibly charged, they shrug their shoulders and say, well, I can't believe he did that, but at least that didn't happen to me. Well, I'm glad. I sure wouldn't want to have been in his shoes. But they just go on about their lives without thinking that this is an endemic problem. But in fact, it is. The misuse of authority under monarchies, under dictatorships, under any kind of government, the misuse of authority over the individual citizen has been going on since the beginning of the world. Certainly has been part of this country from the inception, but it has never been used with abandon like it has been in the last 20 years. And the Democrat Party has latched onto this process of going after individuals simply for their political views or their personal animosities. The result has been to devastate individuals, to bankrupt them because they have to pay attorney's fees, to ruin their reputation, to destroy their businesses, to virtually destroy their families, and possibly to sentence them to convict them and sentence them to jail. I am a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for 6 years. I believe in law enforcement. I absolutely think that legal, justifiable law enforcement with probable cause, the proper evidence is necessary to conduct a free society, to maintain law and order. But a prosecutor or an attorney general like Merrick Garland and a prosecutor like Jack Smith go after people as they did to Trump, and he won, or they did to me, and I won, or they did to the people in the January 6th debacle, when they took innocent people and just drove them into the grave practically by prosecuting and bankrupting them, embarrassing them, and costing their reputation, and even imprisoning. It has gone way too far. And they did. They used the barrier of Joseph Stalin's executioner, his mantra, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. And they went after him, after Trump, through persecutor Jack Smith, all those cases, and he stood up and won. They went after Governor McDonald of Virginia, who was a very popular governor of this state of Virginia. 2 weeks after he got out of office, after a very successful term, he gets indicted, he gets charged, he gets tried, he gets convicted, his family's disrupted. They go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unanimously tells Jack Smith he was prosecuting Governor McDonald for a crime that didn't even exist, and threw it out completely and gave Jack Smith a reprimand. But what happened to Jack Smith? Well, he shrugs his shoulders. He's still got a job. He walks on to the next case where he can persecute somebody. That's why I want to do something. I think Governor McDonald was a prime topic of my book. He was a top victim. But I list a whole bunch of victims in my book because I think people have to understand that lawfare, which is an easy term, but is a terrible blight on a free society because innocent people are victimized by the state, and we just can't have it to have a free society. The only way you can get to protect the innocent individuals is that when a prosecutor goes after a person for political or personal reasons, or a policeman or an investigator, an FBI agent goes after a person for political or personal reasons, then without probable cause or without evidence, then that prosecutor, that investigator should be civilly or criminally responsible. I'm a former prosecutor. I believe in criminal prosecution. I believe that we have to have law and order for this country. But I do not. It would never have occurred to me to go after somebody for political reasons. And there are a few, I wouldn't say more than 1 or 2% of the prosecutors in this country who do it either to advance their own station in life or to do it for political reasons, like the Obama administration, not the Biden administration did far too frequently. But it's got to be stopped. If we can curtail it, then this country can survive. But literally, the freedoms, our Constitution, are at stake if we allow this process of lawfare to continue.
Bob, just one more question on that topic of lawfare. I saw during the Biden years where there was persecution and prosecution chasing down and punishing the Trump legal team. So if anybody worked for Trump, they started to go after them. If that happens and people are intimidated away from defending what's right and good because of threat to their own legal well-being, how do we deal with that?
Well, that's probably one of the most dangerous facets of this whole concept. And I got into it only a little bit. John Eastman and Jeff I can't think of his last name, but these guys have been prosecuted, and the bar administrations have disbarred John Eastman, and they're going after Jeffrey. But both of them were lawyers for President Trump.
Yes.
And they gave him advice. And the lawyers who control the Bar Association have said, well, you gave him bad advice, we're going to prosecute her. And they do, and totally try to disbar him completely. And I think Mr. Eastman has been disbarred. That's just every bit as bad as a criminal prosecution. It's a civil proceeding, but it's every bit as bad as the worst criminal prosecutions. And again, it has to stop. And I think that the lawyers who recommend pursuing such cases against innocent lawyers who have just given legal advice, those lawyers need to be accountable. We've got to make people responsible for their actions. And if they're unfairly and unjustifiably going after innocent people just for their own political or personal reasons, they need to be accountable.
Bob Livingston, you've done a wonderful job telling the story and also sounding the warning on lawfare. If people would like to get in touch with you, or if they'd like to get a copy of your book, The Rainbow Chaser, tell us how we could do that.
I hope they're in all the bookstores, and they're certainly on Amazon. And if they're not in the bookstores, please go to the bookstores and tell them to order The Rainbow Chaser by Bob Livingston. It's a list of a whole bunch of cases that have been just outrageously pursued by the Biden administration, but also by other prosecutors, Republican and Democrat. It's the process that is bad. It's not necessarily one party or the other, but it was most egregiously used by the Biden administration. Frankly, the prosecutors responsible need to pay a price.
Bob Livingston, thank you so much for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at schillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.